For 10 years, my mother-in-law introduced me as Ethan's wife, and never once by my name. She called my career playing with a calculator. At her Christmas table, in front of everyone, she once said, "I love my son too much to pretend. You'll never really be good enough for him, but he's made his choice." And I smiled and passed the potatoes, because that's what you do. Vivian Ashford came from old money, or the performance of it, and she made sure I understood, every single day for a decade, that I came from nothing. Last Tuesday, she sat at my kitchen table with her hands shaking around a cup of tea she couldn't drink. The Ashford name was about to collapse into bankruptcy and disgrace, and the woman who told me I'd never be good enough for her son had come to beg the calculator girl to save her. She had no idea what I was about to find. Because I don't just count money, I follow it. And someone had taught Vivian Ashford a very expensive lesson about the difference. Let me take you back, because that cup of tea only means something if you understand the 10 years of contempt that led to it. My name is Cora. I grew up in a mill town where my father worked maintenance for the school district, and my mother did the books for 3 small businesses out of our kitchen. We were not poor exactly, but we were the kind of family that felt every dollar, and I learned 2 things very early. I learned that money is not mysterious, it's just arithmetic that people are afraid of. And I learned that my mother, sitting at that kitchen table with her ledgers, could see things in a column of numbers that other people missed entirely. She could tell when a business was lying to itself. She had the eye, and she gave it to me. I put myself through school working nights, and I became a forensic accountant. I want to explain what that actually is, because Vivian spent a decade pretending it was nothing, and it is very much not nothing. A forensic accountant is a person who follows money to find the truth. We're the ones who trace fraud, who reconstruct where funds really went, who sit across from embezzlers and Ponzi schemers and follow the paper trail they were sure no one could follow. When a company is being looted from the inside, when a charity is a front, when an investment is too good to be true, people like me are the ones who prove it. I spent my career learning to see the exact kind of lie that dresses itself up in confidence and expensive shoes. Remember that. It matters more than I could have known. I met Ethan Ashford at a friend's wedding. He was kind in a way that had nothing to prove, which I would later understand was a small miracle given the mother who raised him. We fell in love the normal way, slowly and then completely, and when he brought me home to meet Vivian, I walked into a house that was a museum of a certain idea of itself. The Ashford name was on a plaque at the country club. There were oil paintings of stern ancestors. And there was Vivian, elegant and freezing, who looked at me for about 4 seconds and priced me like a handbag she'd never carry. She was polite at first, in the way that's worse than rude, because you can't point to it. She asked where I summered. She asked what my parents did, and when I told her, something flickered across her face, a tiny, satisfied confirmation. Then she asked what I did, and I told her I was a forensic accountant, and she gave a little laugh and said, "Oh, how practical. Someone has to count it all, I suppose." And that was the moment she filed me. Practical. Someone who counts. A servant of money, rather than a person born to it. For 10 years, that would be my role in the Ashford story, and Vivian would never once suspect that the servant of money understood money better than anyone in that family had in 3 generations. I want to say something here to anyone who's ever been sized up like that, in the first 4 seconds, and found wanting. It does something to you, being prejudged by your origins. For a long time I carried a quiet defensiveness about where I came from, a reflex to explain that my parents were smart, that we were poor but not ignorant, that a mill town produces people every bit as capable as any country club. It took me years to stop explaining. Because the truth is that the people who look down on your beginnings are telling you nothing about your beginnings, and everything about the narrowness of their imagination. Vivian could not conceive that the most valuable person she would ever meet had grown up doing homework at a kitchen table covered in someone else's ledgers. That failure of imagination was hers, not mine. and one day it would cost her nearly everything. The 10 years that followed were a slow education in how a certain kind of cruelty operates, the kind that never once raises its voice. Vivian never insulted me in a way I could have named to Ethan without sounding paranoid. She built her contempt out of small, deniable pieces, so that if I ever objected, I would be the one who seemed unstable. This is a thing worth understanding about people like her, because so many of you are living with your own Vivian. The most sophisticated cruelty is designed to make the victim look like the problem. It's a magic trick. The wound is real, but the weapon is always invisible. It was the name, first. 10 years of family gatherings where I was introduced to newcomers as Ethan's wife, never Cora, as though I were a role he'd filled rather than a person he'd chosen. It was the comparisons. Ethan's sister Brooke had married a man named Chandler whose family summered in the right places, and Vivian held Brooke up like a trophy of correct choices, praising the match at every dinner, in a way that was really an ongoing verdict on mine. It was the way she talked about my work, always the little laugh, always the calculator, always the faint implication that a real wife for an Ashford would not need to work at all, that my competence was itself a kind of failure. Evidence that Ethan had married down into a family that had to earn its money instead of simply having it. And it was the money itself, which in the Ashford world was the true measure of a soul. Vivian moved through life as if wealth were a form of moral standing, as if the fact that her late husband had left her comfortable made her a better kind of person than my mother, who kept 3 small businesses honest from her kitchen table. She would mention prices. She would notice my clothes. She once, at a birthday dinner, insisted on paying for everything and then made sure, with a sigh and a comment, that everyone knew she'd done it, that the Ashfords carried people, and I was among the carried. I sat through it. I sat through all of it, for 10 years, because I loved Ethan, and because I had learned, in a mill town, that dignity is something you hold quietly inside yourself, where no one can take it, rather than something you defend out loud every time it's poked. But I want to be honest about the cost, because I think the people listening deserve the truth, and not a saint. It wore on me. There were nights I cried in the car before Ashford dinners. There were arguments with Ethan, who loved me but could never quite see his mother clearly, who kept saying, "That's just how she is," in the exact tone that lets cruelty continue forever. I came close, more than once, to telling Vivian exactly what I thought of her, and her plaque and her paintings, and her performance of a class she was mostly imitating. I never did. Partly out of love for Ethan, but partly, if I'm honest, because of something my mother told me once, watching me stew after a bad dinner. She said, "Cora, don't ever waste your fire on people who mistake you for kindling. People like that always end up needing exactly the thing they looked down on. Just wait." I didn't fully believe her, but my mother, as usual, had done the math I couldn't see yet. Because Vivian's whole world was about to meet a man in expensive shoes, and I was the only person in her life trained to see exactly what he was. To understand what happened to Vivian, you have to understand the fragile thing the Ashford fortune actually was, underneath the plaque and the paintings. This is the part I only fully mapped later, professionally, when I had the files in front of me. But I'd sensed the shape of it for years. The way you sense a house is emptier than it looks. The Ashford money was real, once. Vivian's late husband, Ethan's father, had been a genuinely capable businessman who built something solid. But he'd died when Ethan was young, and he'd left it all to Vivian. And Vivian had spent the decades since doing something very common and very dangerous. She'd been living off the principal while believing she was living off the interest. The Ashford lifestyle, the club, the house, the carrying of other people, the whole performance of old money, cost a great deal to maintain, and it produced nothing. Vivian didn't build. Vivian displayed. And a fortune that only ever leaves the account, year after year, decade after decade, is not a fortune. It's a countdown. By the time I'd been in the family a few years, though no one said it out loud, the countdown was getting short. There were quiet second mortgages. There was pressure I could read in the way certain dinners got a little less lavish, while the boasting got a little louder, which is always the tell. When people start performing wealth harder, it's usually because the real thing is running out. Here is a truth I've learned in my profession that I want to give to every person listening, because it will protect some of you someday. The people most vulnerable to financial catastrophe are very often not the poor. The poor know exactly how much they have, because they have to. The truly vulnerable are people like Vivian. People with an identity built entirely on money, a shrinking pile of it, and a desperate, unspoken terror of anyone finding out. That terror makes them do the worst possible thing at the worst possible time. It makes them chase. It makes them reach for the impossible return, the secret opportunity, the charming man who promises he can make the countdown stop. Fear of losing status is the single most reliable engine of financial ruin I have ever encountered. And Vivian was pure, distilled fear underneath all that ice. She just hid it behind contempt for people like me. I could see it, and it's a strange thing to watch someone you don't even like walk slowly toward a cliff. Part of me, the part that was 10 years tired, felt something ugly and satisfied about it. I won't pretend otherwise. But another part of me, the professional, the daughter of the woman with the ledgers, felt the old alarms start to ring. Because a person in Vivian's exact position, frightened and proud and quietly running out, is not just heading for trouble, she's wearing a sign that only predators can read. And in my line of work, I have learned that predators can always read that sign. It was only a matter of time before one of them walked up to Vivian at her own country club, in beautiful shoes, and smiled at her like she was the most important woman in the room. His name was Roland Vance, and he had the most expensive shoes I had ever seen. I met Roland Vance at Vivian's 65th birthday party, and I knew what he was before we finished shaking hands. I want to be careful here, because in hindsight everything looks obvious, and I don't want to pretend I had proof that night. I didn't. What I had was a decade of professional pattern recognition, screaming at a frequency only I could hear. Roland was introduced as Vivian's private wealth advisor, a man who managed money for a very select group of families, and he was, to everyone else at that party, perfect. Charming without trying. Deferential to Vivian in exactly the way she starved for. He listened to her talk about the Ashford name and the plaque and the ancestors as though he were in the presence of royalty, and I watched Vivian bloom under it like a plant that hadn't seen sun in years. And that was the first thing that frightened me, because it wasn't really about the money yet. It was emotional. Roland wasn't just selling Vivian an investment, he was selling her importance. He made a lonely, frightened widow feel like the grand lady she pretended to be, and he did it with a precision that no honest advisor bothers with, because honest advisors are selling returns, not feelings. There's a name for what I was watching, and it sits in the overlap between two kinds of fraud that ruin more ordinary people every year than almost anything else. Affinity fraud, where a predator wins your trust by seeming to belong to your world. And the emotional con, where the manipulation of your loneliness does the work that logic never could. Roland was running both on Vivian at once, and she never had a chance, because he was giving her the one thing her money had never quite bought. He was making her feel seen. I did the math on Roland in about 10 minutes of conversation. He dropped just enough real financial vocabulary to sound legitimate, and then swerved, every time, away from anything specific. He talked about proprietary strategies and exclusive access, and returns that were consistent, always consistent, year after year, up markets and down, which is the single biggest red flag in the entire world of investing, because consistent high returns in all conditions do not exist. They have never existed. Every time a human being has claimed to deliver them, it has been a lie. And usually the same lie, the one named after a man called Ponzi 100 years ago. I stood at that party holding a glass of wine, and understood, with the cold clarity my mother gave me, that this smiling man was very likely a thief, and that my mother-in-law was handing him her family's future. So I tried to warn her, and I want you to remember, as I tell you how that went, that I was the only person in Vivian Ashford's entire glittering world who was actually equipped to protect her. The calculator girl, the one who counts. I pulled Ethan aside first, told him quietly that Roland set off every alarm I had, that the returns he was describing were impossible, that I wanted to look at whatever paperwork his mother had signed. Ethan, caught as always between the two of us, said maybe I was reading too much into it, that Roland managed money for lots of important people, that Mom seemed happy. And I realized, with a sinking heart, that a decade of Vivian teaching everyone I was just practical had done its work. When the one real expert in the family finally raised the alarm, no one could hear it over the sound of her contempt. I went to Vivian directly. It was one of the hardest things I ever did, because I knew exactly how it would go, and I did it anyway, which I've decided to be proud of. I asked her, as gently and respectfully as I could manage, to let me review Roland's fund materials before she committed anything more. I didn't accuse. I framed it as a professional courtesy, a second set of eyes, the kind of thing any family should do before a major financial decision. I told her it was what I did for a living, that it would cost her nothing, that I only wanted to make sure everything was as solid as it appeared. The look she gave me is one I'll never forget, because it contained the entire 10 years in a single expression. She set down her glass, and she smiled the cold Ashford smile, and she said, "Cora, I understand that in your line of work you see criminals everywhere. It must be exhausting, thinking the worst of everyone. But Roland is a real financial professional. He manages fortunes far older than anything your family has ever had to count. I know it must be difficult for someone with your background to imagine, but not everyone with money is running a scheme. Some of us simply have it." And then, the knife, delivered soft. I'd hoped that after all these years, you might have learned the difference between people like Roland and people like you. I need to stop and speak to you directly, because if you've ever tried to warn someone you love about a person who was manipulating them, you know this specific helplessness, and it is one of the worst feelings there is. I knew the way you know a stove is hot, and I had no power at all, because knowledge without standing is just noise. Vivian didn't have to listen to me, and every instinct of pride and contempt she'd built over 10 years told her not to. Roland had made her feel like a queen. I was making her feel like a mark, and no frightened, proud person will ever choose the voice that scares them over the voice that flatters them, until it's far too late. That's not stupidity, it's human. It's exactly the vulnerability that the Rolands of the world are built to exploit. And I need to be honest that her words did their work on me, even knowing what she was. That's the insidious thing about a decade of being told you're less. Even when you know the person is a fool walking off a cliff, some small, trained part of you still flinches and wonders if they're right about you. I drove home from that conversation and cried, not for Vivian, but for the girl in me who still, after all these years, wanted the grand lady's approval and would never get it. Then I dried my face, because I also knew something Vivian didn't. I knew I was right. And being right, even unheard, is a kind of ground you can stand on. So Vivian did what fear and pride told her to do. She didn't just keep her money with Roland, she went deeper. To fund what he described as an exclusive, limited opportunity. A chance to finally reverse the countdown she was so terrified of. She liquidated investments, she borrowed against the house, the Ashford house with the plaque, and she handed Roland Vance nearly everything she had left in the world. She told herself she was being shrewd. She told herself she was securing the family legacy. She did it, in part, specifically to prove that she didn't need advice from the calculator girl. And I want to be honest about the grief of it. I stopped trying to warn her, not because I gave up, but because I finally understood that she would have to hit the ground before she could ever look up. And I was the only one who could see how far the ground was. The fall came about 8 months later, and it was worse than even I had feared. Roland Vance vanished on a Thursday. I remember it was a Thursday because Ethan got the call from a hysterical Brooke while we were making dinner, and I watched my husband's face change as he listened, and I knew before he said a word that the cliff had been reached. Roland's office was closed. His phone was disconnected. The fund website was gone. The money? All of it? Decades of Ashford wealth and 8 months of frantic liquidation, and the mortgage on the family house had gone with him. What had happened to Vivian is one of the most common and most devastating financial crimes in the world, and I need to explain it plainly, because understanding it is the only vaccine against it. Roland had almost certainly been running a Ponzi scheme, the oldest con there is, and it works the same way every single time. There is no real investment. The consistent returns that seduced Vivian were never returns at all. They were simply other victims' money, cycled back to earlier victims to keep everyone happy and quiet and recruiting their friends. It looks like genius right up until the moment it looks like nothing, because it depends on new money constantly flowing in, and the day that flow slows, the whole structure collapses instantly and completely. When Roland disappeared, he wasn't fleeing a bad quarter. He was fleeing the mathematical certainty that had been baked in from the very first dollar. Vivian was ruined. Not embarrassed, not diminished, ruined. In the total and public way she had spent her entire life fearing above death itself. The house was mortgaged beyond its worth. The accounts were empty. There were debts she'd taken on to feed Roland's opportunity that she had no way to pay. The country club, the plaque, the whole performance. All of it was now a countdown that had reached zero. And the cruelest part, the part I understood professionally and felt personally, was that she had done it to herself with her own 2 hands, driven by the exact pride and fear that had also driven her to spend 10 years telling me I was beneath her son. The same fragility caused both. It was always, the same wound. I want to tell you what I felt when I first understood the scale of it, because I promised you honesty, and this is the hard part. I felt vindicated, and the vindication tasted good, and I am not proud of that, but I won't lie about it. 10 years is a long time to be told you are nothing by someone whose whole life turns out to be a bluff. 10 years of contempt, and I had been right, and everyone now knew I had been right, that I'd tried to warn her, that the calculator girl had seen the thief when the grand lady could not. There was a version of me, a tired and human version, that wanted to sit back and let Vivian Ashford drown in the exact water she'd been so sure she was too good to fall into. And for a few days, I sat with that feeling. I let myself have it. Because before you can choose to be better than someone's opinion of you, I think you have to be honest about the part of you that just wants to win. And then, on a Tuesday, there was a knock at my door, and Vivian Ashford, who had never once needed anything from me, was standing on my porch, and she had been crying. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where my mother's ledgers would have felt at home, and Vivian's ancestors' oil paintings would have sneered, and she wrapped her hands around a cup of tea she was too sick with fear to drink. For a long moment she couldn't speak. I'd never seen her without the armor. It turns out that underneath the ice and the plaque and the 10 years of contempt, Vivian Ashford was just a frightened old woman who had built her entire self out of money and had just watched it all disappear. Stripped of it, she was smaller than I'd ever imagined, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't feel small next to her at all. And then she asked. It cost her everything to do it, I could see that, and I'll give her this much credit for the rest of my life. She looked at me, the daughter-in-law she'd said would never be good enough, and she said, Cora, I don't have anyone else. Ethan's beside himself. Brooke's useless with this. The lawyers want money I don't have. You do this. You find money that people have hidden. You told me what Roland was, and I was too proud to listen. And now I'm asking you. Her voice broke. Can you save me? Is there anything left to save? The woman who counted money was being begged, by the woman who had mocked her for it, to perform the exact skill she'd spent a decade calling worthless. I want to talk to you directly for a moment, because I suspect a lot of you are, right now, imagining what you would do in my chair, and I imagine the answers are split. Part of you wants me to say no, wants me to remind her of every dinner, every Ethan's wife, every not good enough, and then close the door. And I understand that part of you completely, because it lived in me too, loud and justified, in that exact moment. There is nothing wrong with the part of you that wants the people who hurt you to face what they've earned. But I want to tell you what I was actually weighing at that table, because it turned out to be the most important decision of my life, and it had almost nothing to do with Vivian. I wasn't deciding whether Vivian deserved my help. She didn't, not really, not by the ledger of the last 10 years. I was deciding who I was going to be, because here is the thing I understood, sitting across from her collapse. If I said no, if I let her drown to save her being right, then for the rest of my life the meanest version of Vivian's opinion of me would be true. I would have become small and vengeful and ruled by the wound she'd given me. But if I said yes, if I used the very skill she'd spent a decade mocking to do something she could never have done for herself, then I would prove, permanently and beyond any argument, exactly what I was. Not with a speech, with competence, with grace she hadn't earned and I chose to give anyway, which is the only kind that actually means anything. My mother's voice was in that kitchen. People like that always end up needing exactly the thing they look down on. Just wait. I had waited 10 years, and now the waiting had a purpose. I said yes, and then I opened my laptop, and I became the most dangerous thing Roland Vance had ever made an enemy of. A forensic accountant with a personal reason to find him. I told Vivian I would need everything. Every document, every email, every statement Roland had ever sent her, every wire confirmation, every scrap. And here the years reversed themselves in a way that still moves me. Vivian, who had spent a decade treating my profession as a servant's chore, now sat at my table and handed me her ruin like a patient handing over her body to a surgeon, with a helpless, complete trust she had never once shown me before. She watched me work that first night with an expression I'd never seen on her, something like awe, as I moved through the documents fast, pulling threads, building a timeline, speaking the language of money at a level she was only now realizing she'd never actually possessed. Because that was the thing Roland had counted on, the thing all of them count on. He'd targeted people who performed sophistication but didn't have it, people fluent in the appearance of wealth and illiterate in its mechanics. Vivian could discuss a wine list and a summer address, but she could not read a capital account, and Roland had chosen her precisely for that gap. What he had not counted on, what none of them count on, was that behind the frightened grand lady stood a Milltown forensic accountant who read financial statements the way other people read street signs. He'd built his whole scheme to be invisible to his victims. He had no defense at all against someone who wasn't one. I need to say something to you directly, because if you've come this far with me, I think you already know this story was never really about revenge. Maybe you've been the underestimated one. Maybe you've been told your work, your background, your quiet competence made you lesser, by someone whose confidence turned out to be hollow. Maybe you're waiting, like I was, for the day your worth becomes undeniable. If you've made it this far with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel and join us every day. Because the lesson I keep coming back to is this: the people who look down on you are almost never seeing you clearly. They're seeing what they need you to be so that they can feel like more. And one day, more often than you'd think, the very skill they mocked is the only thing standing between them and the abyss. Your worth was never theirs to measure. And as I worked into the small hours of that first night, Vivian asleep in our guest room for the first time ever, something happened that changed the whole shape of this from a rescue into a reckoning. Because the more I followed Roland's money, the more I realized Vivian was not his only victim. The patterns, the shell companies, the wire routes, They were too practiced, too industrial. This was not a man who had scammed one lonely widow. This was a machine that had done this many times, to many people, and had gotten away with it every time, because his victims were all exactly like Vivian. Proud, ashamed, and far more likely to quietly absorb their ruin than to expose it and admit they'd been fools. Roland's genius wasn't the scheme. It was choosing marks too embarrassed to fight back. He had never once been hunted by someone who did this for a living. Until now. What I did over the following weeks is the unglamorous, patient work that actually brings men like Roland Vance down. And I want to describe it, because the myth is that these criminals are geniuses, and the truth is that they rely on no one bothering to look. I followed the money. That's the whole secret of my profession. Money always leaves a trail, always, because it has to move through a system built to record it. And a man moving stolen millions leaves more trail, not less. Roland had layered his scheme through a series of shell companies, entities with impressive names and no substance, designed to make the money hard to follow for anyone who gave up easily. I do not give up easily. My mother didn't raise a quitter, and Roland had insulted my entire existence without ever knowing my name. I mapped the shells one by one, tracing how Vivian's money had flowed out of her accounts, through Roland's fund, and into the structure beyond. And as I built the map, I did the thing Roland had never faced before. I connected the dots between victims, using public records, court filings, the fingerprints these entities leave. I began to assemble a picture of a scheme far larger than the Ashfords, with a pattern of victims stretching back years, all of them fitting the same profile, all of them, like Vivian, more inclined to hide their shame than to chase their thief. I was assembling something no single victim ever could. A complete, documented, prosecutable picture of the entire machine. And crucially, I found that not all of the money was gone. This is the part people don't understand about these frauds. When a Ponzi collapses, the con artist rarely has time to spend or hide everything, and skilled forensic tracing can often locate recoverable assets. Funds sitting in accounts, property purchased, money frozen mid-flight. I identified assets, real ones. Not everything Vivian had lost, not close, but far more than the zero she'd resigned herself to. I built a file meticulous and complete, the kind of file that turns a hopeless victim's complaint into a case that authorities cannot ignore, because I had already done the years of work they'd otherwise have to do themselves. Then I took it to the people with the power I didn't have. I brought my file to the authorities who handle financial crime, and I brought it the way a professional brings a case, organized, sourced, and undeniable, with the asset trail laid out and the victim pattern documented. This is the step most victims never reach, and it's why so many of these criminals never face anything. A lone victim walks in, confused, ashamed, holding a folder of statements they don't understand, and even a well-meaning investigator has to spend months building what I could hand over finished. I have sat across from investigators many times in my career, and I know the difference between a complaint they'll file away and a case they'll pursue. This was the second kind. I watched their faces change as they turned the pages, the same way Vivian's had, the same way they always do when the calculator girl lays out the truth that the confident man was sure no one would ever bother to find. Roland Vance had built his life on the certainty that his victims were too proud and too ashamed to come after him. He had finally, unknowingly, stolen from the one who wasn't. Roland Vance was arrested. I want to be honest that it did not happen in a single dramatic afternoon, because real justice against financial criminals grinds slowly. But it happened. And it happened because of the file I built at my kitchen table. His assets were frozen. The scheme was exposed, publicly, and the other victims, the ones who'd been suffering in silence exactly as he'd counted on, finally had a case to attach themselves to, built on the foundation I'd laid, and a portion of the money, through the asset recovery I'd traced, was clawed back. Vivian did not get everything back, Nobody in these stories ever does. But she was pulled back from total ruin, from the bankruptcy and disgrace that had been an absolute certainty the day she cried on my porch, by the exact skill she had spent 10 years calling a servant's chore. Here is the inversion, and I've turned it over many times, because it's almost too clean to be real, except that it was. For a decade, Vivian Ashford measured human worth by proximity to money, and by that measure, she had ranked me at the bottom and herself at the top. And in the end, her money turned out to be a fragile performance that a con man in nice shoes dismantled in 8 months, while the thing she'd truly possessed of value, the only thing that actually saved her, was the daughter-in-law she'd deemed unworthy. The grand lady was the fool. The calculator girl was the one who understood money all along. Everything Vivian believed about worth was not just wrong. It was exactly backwards, and it took losing everything for the truth to stand up in her own kitchen and look her in the eye. I did not gloat. I want to tell you that plainly, because it's the whole point, and because I know how satisfying the gloat would have been. When it was over, when the file was filed and the arrest was made and the first recovered funds came back, I did not sit Vivian down and recite the 10 years. I didn't have to. She knew. That was the thing that made it complete. There is no speech I could have given that would have landed with a fraction of the weight of what she now understood on her own, every time she looked at me. The woman she'd been so sure was beneath her son had saved her from the abyss, using the very worth she'd refused to see. My silence said it more completely than any words, the same way her contempt had once tried to. The conversation that changed things between us was short, and it happened at that same kitchen table, months later. Vivian, quieter now, permanently changed in a way that had nothing to do with the money, said, "I spent 10 years telling you that you weren't good enough for this family. And you're the only reason there's a family left to be part of." She didn't cry. She'd done her crying. She just looked at me, and for the first time in a decade she said my name, my actual name, Cora, and she said, "I was never talking about you. I was afraid of everything you could see." And it turned out you could see everything. It was the closest she could come to an apology, and I understood, finally, that a person like Vivian confessing her fear was a larger thing than most people's tears. I took it. Not because she'd earned my forgiveness, but because I had become someone who no longer needed to withhold it. The Ashford house was sold. There was no saving that. And watching Vivian let it go was the moment I stopped seeing her as a villain and started seeing her as a person. The plaque came down. The paintings were auctioned to people who didn't know the stern faces in them. And Vivian, at 66, moved into a modest apartment and began, for the first time in her life, to understand what her money had actually been, which was never worth, only ever the fear of not having it. She is smaller now in the ways that matter least, and larger in the ways that matter most. Loss did for her what a lifetime of comfort never could. It introduced her to herself. People ask me if I regret helping her, and the answer is never. Not because Vivian deserved it, but because of who I got to be by doing it. For 10 years she tried to define me, and I had always, quietly, let her opinion have more power over me than I admitted. Helping her was the day I took that power back for good. I didn't take it back by winning an argument. I took it back by being, in the clearest possible terms, the exact opposite of everything she'd said I was. Capable where she said I was common. Graceful where she'd been cruel. And decent, in the one moment when indecency would have felt so justified. That is the only revenge I have ever found worth having. Not making them suffer. Becoming so fully yourself that their entire story about you collapses. So let me leave you with the thing I most want you to carry. Whoever has looked at you and decided you were less, their certainty is not the truth about you. It is the truth about their fear. Vivian looked down on me for a decade because the thing I could do frightened her, because competence she couldn't perform threatened the whole fragile story she'd built of herself. The people who make you feel small are so often the ones most terrified of their own smallness. Do your work. Keep your dignity where they can't reach it. Get good, quietly, at the thing they mock. Because the wheel turns more reliably than anyone believes. And one day, the person who told you that you'd never be good enough may need the exact thing that made you good enough all along. And on that day, who you choose to be will be the only measure of worth that ever mattered. If this story meant something to you, follow the channel and share it with 5 people who need to hear it tonight, especially anyone who's been told they're not good enough. Leave a comment about the moment someone underestimated you and what you did with it. And if there's a story you want to see told here, put it below. I read every one. Somewhere out there tonight, someone is being called common by a person who is about to need everything they are